Well, here we are again, another episode of Compliance in Motion, the podcast where we take a deep dive into stories, strategies, and systems that power real-world workplace safety. And today, we certainly aren't falling short of that. We've got an excellent guest today with us on our podcast. First, I'm Tony DeAscentis. I'm your podcast host, CEO, and co-founder of Ving. We find folks all across the country who have significant, deep experience in safety and compliance and bring them to the forefront to share stories with you, practical things that you can take away and implement in your business today. And if you don't walk away with something tactical that you can do today or tomorrow, I hope you walk away with an inspirational story on how to advance your career in safety and compliance. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Scott Couchenour with us today. Scott, thanks so much for joining the Compliance in Motion podcast.
Tony, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Sure. Guest for our listeners today, our guest, he's a coach, a leader, somebody with deep roots in construction, safety, and compliance. Now, Scott has guided teams through all kinds of challenges, maintaining safety standards in all kinds of high-risk environments. So this is one of the reasons that we're really interested in picking his brain. So Scott, this is an interesting career choice for many. We all started someplace. Some of us took it on as a career like you have, and others in our listening audience were just kind of people who, hey, the boss said you're in charge of safety and compliance now. Your background is really deep and rich with some interesting experiences. So what drew you to career in safety and compliance?
Man, it's been quite a journey. So a little bit of context is my dad is a preacher's kid. His dad was a preacher, and their church was going through a building program back in the mid to late 60s, and the contractor had inflated the final invoice and skipped town. So Grandpa had no finished project and no money to finish it. So my dad stepped in and helped to get financing and got the project finished. And then someone said there ought to be a company exist to see this never happens to churches again. So Dad came from a design build rolling mill machinery background. He took his design build mentality and started helping another church, incorporated in 1970. And
Really?
I'm one of five kids, the fourth of five kids. And Dad reached this point in, I would say, late 70s, where he was either going to just ride this pony himself until it died or grow it so that all five of us kids would have the option to join the business if we wanted to. Essentially, three of us joined. I joined when I was 24, back in 1989, and I replaced the VP of operations at the time. We spent 3 months together onboarding and transferring his role to my role. That position contained legal, license, insurance, safety, bonding, all the things that, I woke up in the morning and basically asked the question, what could go wrong? And, I just kind of jumped into it at age 24 and spent the next 24 years in that role and began to build safety. I recognized early on that safety it was always viewed as this necessary evil. It was always something that you felt like things were being compelled.
Which really doesn't make sense that it's a necessary evil, but there are a lot of eyes getting rolled every time somebody, you have to go to safety training, stuff like that. When the reality of it is, it's the stopgap. It's the way to help keep people in the know to stay safe on the job. But yeah, I agree with you. We hear it all the time. It's the necessary evil. Say more about that.
Well, that began to play out in, we were building up some safety programs and we had a little bit of safety, but when I took it over, really began to build a program around it. And I realized very early on that at least in our business, we had management and then we had the people working in the field, right? Mm-hmm. It became very apparent that there were two different types of mentalities, and I knew we had to bridge that. I could
Hmm.
not, from top down, say, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, I tried that and it didn't work, right? What I learned early on was those who were actually in the field doing the work that was in that dangerous zone had to be the ones to accept it and make it a part of their culture. And so
Hmm.
it was a very interesting approach to have to make it their idea and
Hmm.
couch it in a way that they owned it. I mean, the worst thing you can do is make them responsible, but have no authority. So we had to give
Right.
authority and responsibility.
Right. And really, with that ownership, people, it doesn't matter what it is. If your leadership is saying, hey, here's your ownership, you guys need to be intimately involved in this and you need to adopt it. So help us understand the best way for you to get this done safely. And when people have that sense of ownership and input into the process, their mindset changes from that necessary evil to, hey, I created this to help myself and others, stay safe on the job. It's interesting. I was just going to ask you, like, about in your experience, what the most common safety hazards in construction teams are. And, the go to answers are probably, A, B, and C, which we'll talk a little bit here. But this is like a underlying common hazard. Leadership is up here, the people on the ground with the mud on their boots and the gloves on their hands and out there in the field are over here, and there's a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really a hazard to the work environment, that disconnect. Now, you mentioned about developing a process or a system. Did your process or system focus on closing that gap between leadership and ownership of the employee in the field?
Very much so. It became more of a interpersonal situation as opposed to the safety, actually taking step A, B, and C in safety. It was more, how can I communicate? And it was more of an interpersonal communication thing than it was safety. Safety was the topic, but the delivery of bridging leadership to those in the field really had more to do with listening skills and being able to relate to the people in the field. I mean,
Hmm.
the bottom line is we're all human beings, and if we can communicate with one another, it's very important, and it helps to ultimately have a safe construction site.
So, what would be a process? I'm envisioning like our typical workforce in our core markets of construction, manufacturing, and the trades. This is a group of people that are very well experienced in what they do day to day. And they're also, a lot of them have careers in their chosen trade, and they've been to all different kinds of training. I bet not very many of them have been to interpersonal communications training, listening, communicate, how to properly communicate yourself. It seems like, talk about some eye rolling when
Yeah.
you would go in. Is that what you is part of the process, helping people understand and giving them practical skills to be better interpersonal communicators?
Yeah, I think when we talk to project managers who oversaw the superintendents who then oversaw our subcontractors, there's a lot of layers there. Had a lot to do with, what are you trying to ultimately accomplish? You know, the phrase, we want everybody to go home at the end of the day, right? That's a typical safety phrase. We want everybody to go home. Kind of couching the problem with interpersonal skills is, unfortunately, it has been given this title as soft skills, right?
Right.
As though it's kind of like the leftovers. Let's get all the hard stuff done. Let's do the get, nuts and bolts and 2x4s and widgets and everything. And
Yeah.
then if we have time, we'll talk about the soft stuff. But
I love that. Listeners, key right in that. These are not leftover skill trainings. These are core
no,
competency skills that are really going to help round it out.
they're actually soft skills get you further faster where you
Yeah.
want to go. If you polled the average worker, they would like to earn a living, to be safe, to live their life, to go to football games, to come home to their families, all of that. And we somehow see safety and interpersonal skills and all this stuff as this hurdle that we have to overcome. And yet it is actually the very thing that allows us to do what we really want to do in life. And that is enjoy life, and have those experiences with our family and with our friends and all the stuff we do outside of work. Even when we think about that, we can't do what we want to do if we have had an accident that disables us for weeks or months.
Right.
And
So,
it's just it's tough to this is in my mind, safety and what you do prior to an accident to prevent an accident is similar to talking to a 20 or 30-year-old who is starting to have kids and talking to them about you need to have a will, right? We all agree that having a will in place and a trust and all those sorts of things is crucial. But do we really ever do it? It's just really difficult to do something that will have benefits down the road. So we have to
right.
overcome that somehow.
It becomes a challenge. So now, if I'm a listener out there today and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I get it. I have maybe 2 or 3 different buckets, types of training. I have my, safety training and compliance. I have my company training that's specific to our SOPs, standard operating procedures, and I have like this other bucket of training that's like the skill that you need to have. What would be some advice or direction as to how you would guide a company that's accountable for those 3 buckets on how to interweave interpersonal training throughout the process so that it's not like this separate thing that we do? It's not the leftover.
Well, that's a really good question. And I was doing some thinking about before our conversation about this whole thing from a broader context. And I think what you're talking about is 3 different buckets. Rather than looking at them as 3 separate buckets, look at it from a broader context in terms of culture and becoming the fullest expression of who we were meant to be, being the best version of each person that they can be, every employee becoming the best person that they can be. And in order to do that, then we have 3 areas that we can be working on. And so kind of raise the level above just 3 buckets to an overall way of life. This is the way we do things around here, and it's for your ultimate good, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I see it. I mean, the interesting thing about what you're saying there is that, people tend to separate a lot of this is what I do for work, this is what I do outside of work, right?
Hmm.
But the reality of it is you spend a lot of time at work.
Yes,
So
you
it's
do.
who you are, it's who you are. It's what you do. How you treat other people at work is who you are outside of work. And so becoming a better communicator across the board. I think too, when we talk about being a better communicator too, it's certainly about helping other people understand the task at hand and what they need to do to complete it. But it's also how to keep them out of harm's way and, stay within the organizational guidelines of expectations. But if you're working on that same project, and you're hand in hand on a task with somebody else, you better be a good communicator if you're the one to help keep them safe because you're also right next to them. And if that scaffold goes down or something goes wrong, you're riding down right with them, even though you knew exactly how to do it. The safe way, you maybe just didn't know how to communicate it, is exactly spot on. Now, there's a whole thing around going on with generations as well. Are you seeing the whole interpersonal communication or soft skills? We don't necessarily want to call them, but that's how people will refer to them. Is it different when you're talking to somebody in their 50s, early 60s versus when you're working with somebody who's more, 23 years old to, 30 years old?
Another great question. I think that definitely there are generational attitudes in general, right? There mileage always varies when you talk about baby boomers and Gen X and Gen Y, Gen Z,
Yeah.
all the different mindsets. I think there's some truth to that. I think that when you talk to a baby boomer, for instance, their badge of honor is they've never taken a vacation in 20 years. And that's a badge of honor, right? Well, their Gen X children watched that and said, I don't want to have anything to do with that, right? And then millennials even more so. So I think there's some, I would guess that as you work with younger individuals, the more open they are to communicating. But then there's so many other layers. I mean, you talk to somebody who knew what it's like to have a dial up, an actual landline in their home and no internet. And then you're talking to somebody who they grew up with the internet. They didn't know anything different. And so that's another layer that you have to look at. I don't know the full answer to all this, but I think it's good if you're listening to this podcast and you're in charge of safety in your organization, recognize all of the different layers of attitude, because we talk about the age group layer, we talk about technological connection, how
Hmm.
were they raised in technology or
Hmm.
not? And then you got the gender layer where, and again, mileage varies, but we men tend to be a little bit more egotistical and say, I've got this. I don't, I don't need the instructions, right? Don't give me an MSDS. I know it's not safe and I don't need to go through this safety training. It's just common sense, right? So there are a lot of different layers that I think it would be wise for the safety manager to be aware of that. But then when you're talking about all these different layers, age group, gender, all this sorts of thing, I think ultimately you want to come down to the individual person and what motivates them individually. What kind of listener are they? What kind of learner are they? Because a lot of times you can learn a lot about somebody by how they talk. Like if they say, I see what you're saying, then that tells you that they're a visual learner. If they
Hmm.
say, hear you, I hear what you're saying, then they're a auditory listener. There are different learning styles. And I think if I were the safety manager of an organization, I would want to zone in on each individual person and how can I convey the importance of safety in a way that they will actually pick up on
Right.
it because that's who they are.
Right.
I remember in leadership, we were always taught you never treat people like checkers. In other words, you don't treat them all the same. You treat them like chess. Every certain person has a different learning style and is at a different stage of life or going through whatever they're going through. Like when you're trying to
Yeah.
convey somebody who's knee deep in a divorce, their ability to take on safety training is going to be different than someone who is not dealing with that or is dealing with
Hmm.
debt at home. So you got to
Hmm.
recognize the person that you're trying to convey this safety training to.
Absolutely. Learning their different styles. Are they more of a person that like show me, or a person that says give it to me and let me read it and then show me, and
Hmm.
literally kind of figuring out what all these tactics are at? Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to do a good job and everybody wants to go home, safe, and and they want to be up for that pay increase and stuff like that. So people
Hmm.
want to understand. They just need to, hear it in a form that's easier for them to absorb. One of the things too that we talk about with the generational challenges and the differences, I do a workshop on knowledge transfer across multi generations.
Hmm.
And throughout this workshop, we cover a variety of different tactics and things that people can think about. But one of the common themes that I keep coming back to throughout all of the workshop and discussions like this one with you today is that at the end of the day, people are people. It doesn't matter what age you are. We all want to feel a sense of belonging. We all want to be heard. We all want to have a chance to speak up when we think when it's needed to speak up. We all have our own family attributes, whether
Hmm.
you're a young person and you're just getting out in the world, or you're somebody who's my age who has grown children. We all
Hmm.
have connections someplace. So at the end of the day, just because somebody's of a different age or gender or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that they need to, one group is not interested in being communicated to another than another group would be. It is more of an individual thing. It's like making sure you understand. And then once people kind of feel like their supervisor, or their foreman is more connected with them in some little way, they're more apt to listen and make room for ideas and education around safety and compliance. So do you have like a particular approach to like assessing whether an organization has a challenge in this area?
I can remember working in the safety program, and a lot of times, just as simple as it sounds, the body language, the looking at, if I was in a room with a bunch of individuals and we were talking about safety, and and I had each person share a little bit about the topic that we're talking about, I would listen not just to what that person was saying, but I'd look at the rest of the room and look at how they're interested in what that person is saying. That tells me who the leaders are and who has respect in that area. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think they're just being sensitive to the reaction, both with body language. Really, if you're a safety manager, you carry around a brand, whether you like it or not. And a brand is what people talk about when you're not around. When you come up in the topic of conversation, whatever it is that is being said about you, that is your brand. And I think as a safety officer or manager, whoever's responsible for conveying safety into the culture needs to be very aware of that brand that they carry with them. And the best way to create a great brand is to make a human connection with each individual person.
Yeah, I really like that idea that you just threw out there to us. And that is like, if you're doing a safety training, maybe start by, asking people in the audience, okay, today we're going to talk about lockout, tagout. Everybody's got a story about lockout, tagout. Let's go through around the room. Let's, pick 2 or 3 people, have them tell their story about maybe it was a new step in a process they implemented once to help, be more thorough with the lockout, tagout, or maybe it was a change in the process and revamped it to make it more efficient or something like that. Giving people the opportunity to talk about the way they were involved in the process previously opens up the doors really for others who haven't been involved yet to hear it's okay for me to speak up and have suggestions and ideas, and it really starts to broaden. And like Scott was saying, is if you're, somebody's talking and you're looking around the room and nobody's really paying attention, but what the person's talking has to say is really good, then you have this big disconnect going on, because everybody should be, really listening to what's going on. But I think that, so many safety managers are out there that I talk to, because I'll facilitate sessions and speak at safety council meetings and stuff like that. Afterwards, I'll talk to people and they're like, yeah, that's all good, but I don't know the basics of how to kick it off. And my suggestion is start small. Don't, if you've got 30 guys or gals in the office doing training, don't ask for stories for all 30, because you won't have time to do your training.
Right.
Go to somebody before the session and say, hey, during today's training session, I'm going to ask you to tell a couple of stories, because I know you got them, about lockout, or ask 1 or 2 people and call on them and get the conversation going. And then the next time, maybe you pick on 2 different other people to help you out, and it starts to snowball, and pretty soon everybody sees this is a thing we go to where we don't just get talked at, we get talked with and made part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference. So a lot of what we've been talking about today is beyond the checklist, beyond the checking the box and hey, we trained them on this, right? We're kind of tying things together and looking around it. And it really becomes kind of a fabric to building an overall safety culture, wouldn't you think?
I think so too. I think there's going to always be a baseline of check marks, right? You got to check boxes. There's compliance and all that sort of stuff. But if you can make it human, and if you can make it, even if you can make it fun and engaging, and include as many people in the process as you can, then you're moving it from a compliance only, like, we have to do this because somebody told us and all that, but make it a part of the culture. And I would say, there's an old adage in leadership, that you want to celebrate what you want to see more of. So when you catch somebody doing a safety thing that is exactly the way it should be done, make a lot of noise about that, because people get the idea that, okay, that's what gets leadership's attention, not the negative stuff, but the good stuff. So you celebrate what you want to see more of, and that becomes part of the culture. And compliance is a small word, culture is a big word, as opposed to compliance being a big word and no culture at all. You want to couch compliance into a bigger context, and basically say, this is the way we do things around here. And, I think one of the signs of success when you have made safety a part of the culture, how do you know if it's really ingrained in your culture? Well, one of the signs is your workers self-regulate. So if a worker sees a fellow worker not doing something that is safety compliant, and they call them out and say, hey, that's not the way we do things around here, I think you've bridged that leadership to worker, those two realms, adequately, because you've made it a part of the culture, and it's just the way things are around here.
Yeah, I love that observation. I think that that's something that every safety manager should be looking for, is when you're out in the field and you see something, see if there's already been dialogue about it and it hasn't been policed, if you will, by the workers on the job site, versus waiting for, hey, here comes the boss, put your glasses on, stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it should be just something that, that people are doing. So, Scott, we've covered a lot of ground here and really talked a lot about beyond the box, beyond checking the box, around building that safety culture through interpersonal communication skills, really transferring ownership, making sure that people have that ownership on the field. Is this the kind of service that you provide your customers, or consultative efforts that you would work with an organization on as part of your backbone and what you do in construction?
Well, I take about a 30-year career in construction, as 24 of those years were VP of operations, like I mentioned. Our particular story, in answer to your question, we were a second generation multi-million-dollar national company that designed and built church related construction. We struggled from 2008. When 2008 happened, that was the beginning of the end of our family business. We didn't know it at the time, but the next 5 years we struggled and could not figure out what was going on. In 2013, the board of directors asked me to become CEO with one job, and that was to reinvent our family business, our 40 years. Whatever we had done for 40 years was now not working, and we needed to change things. So I was about 2.5 years into that, but the 5-year slide made us vulnerable as a family business to one project that had to start in June of 2015. I was 50 years old at the time. We had $20 million under contract in various stages of design that we were working toward. That was our backlog, but we needed this one project to bridge us to get into that backlog. Keeping in mind that we work exclusively with churches, I got a call from the project manager in June of 2015, expecting him to say we got started. Instead, he said, "Are you sitting down?" which typically is not a good thing. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the pastor's been having an affair with the secretary and the news just came out." So that one project, we had backed ourselves into a corner to one project.
Yeah.
It didn't go. We closed our business in 2015. I became a 50-year-old without a career and without an identity, and struggled with that. What I'm doing now is working with business leaders and owners, and bringing all of that experience with me, because I can provide construction companies with a cautionary tale. I know what we did wrong. And I can help business owners, especially in the construction industry, avoid what we went through. Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, and everybody understands that. I mean, if you've heard Jim Collins, that's what you know. He's also written a book after that called How the Mighty Fall. And in that book, he describes 5 stages of decline of a business. And the first stage he defines as hubris born of success, a kind of a sense of pride based on years of success. And that's what we suffered from. It wasn't an arrogant hubris. It was more of a, we can't figure out what's going wrong because we've been successful for so many years. What we didn't see were blind spots that our success actually generated, blind spots that we didn't see. So what I do now is I coach owners and business leaders around the idea of both adding value to your business so it sustains, but also then what does a business owner do when they age out and become, they start to face the exit? And what are they going to do? And they wrestle with the question, who am I if I'm not the business owner? And so that's largely the context. But man, safety, if you don't have safety, those are the building blocks of especially a construction company, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So listeners, certainly Scott, depth, breadth of industry experience in construction, and some tough lessons learned along the way. Of course, we all have those lessons learned along the way, but Scott's in a position to help you if you're somebody who's looking to overcome some of these challenges, whether it spans from, figuring out how to beef up on your interpersonal skills across your workforce, or creating and building momentum around a safety culture, and even transferring over into that business leadership and how it all permeates across the organization so that you can look beyond some of the lessons learned that folks like Scott, myself, and others have had, and maybe turn that corner successfully when the times require it most. I mean, it's so easy to be riding waves of success, and those blind spots are popping up all over around the foundation. You've got to be ready for when they do surface themselves.
That's right.
So, yep. Well, listeners, I just want to hope you enjoyed today's session. I know we covered a lot of interesting ground, kind of off the beaten path from our normal safety and compliance blocking and tackling, but this is actually a great subject to kind of go off that path. And, it is also blocking and tackling subjects to figure out how to, get it to the point where workers can communicate more effectively to create a better, stronger worker environment. So, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope our listeners really absorb some of your leadership, wisdom, and insights as they go out into the field and focus on their primary areas of accountability. And listeners, as usual, if you found today helpful, we'd love it if you'd subscribe, leave a review, share the podcast link with a friend. We are on a mission to reach out and capture as much expertise in safety and compliance with a bunch of different perspectives and make it available to our community of safety professionals across the country. Have a great day, everybody. And Scott, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a pleasure.